So let's just talk a little bit about progress monitoring. So that's our main topic. First Zoom meeting, we talked about eligibility and looking at present levels and just using triangulated data. And then the second topic was around IEPs and goal writing. And so today we're going to look at that progress monitoring. So does anybody have any questions or anything they want to start with before we start working through the slides we have here? Okay. So, and Brenda, you're welcome. Just jump right in here and do some talking, but we'll just move here talking about a progress monitor.
All right. So if you look at this slide, and you will see that in your IEP guidance document on pages 73 through 77, you're going to see this slide. And what it's trying to tell you is the components that we need to have progress monitoring. And it must be ongoing. You have to do whatever it says in your goal. If your goal says that you have to progress monitor once a week, then that's what you'll be doing. You'll be doing it once a week, whatever your goal says. Also, whatever your methods of measurement that you state that you're going to use, you have to use that as well. You can't state that you're going to use direct measures and then turn around and do a curriculum-based measure. You have to do what it says. So you collect that data, and once you collect all that data, then you're going to analyze that data to see what kind of instruction you may need to change, interventions, strategies, those types of things. And to see, and it's a system. The progress monitoring is a system that we do over and over. So that's what progress monitoring is, that we have to look at with those components.
Brenda, I want to ask a quick question. We were just, as we were starting this conversation, we were talking about, so if a student is in the 4th grade, and they are reading at a 1st grade level, and you are presenting them with, when you're progress monitoring that goal, and that goal should be around that child's performance. Is that right? Around their academic performance. So it would be at that 1st grade level.
Well, the goal will be written for the 2nd grade level.
That's right.
But what you're doing is you're doing the increments, you know, from the 1st grade to try to get the child to the 2nd grade. So you'll be in there with, 1.2, 1.3, those types of things. And that's what you'll be progress monitoring. You progress monitor the goals. You're right, not the objectives.
Right. And so we wanted to also talk about that. So if you have a student that is making some progress, and so when you first start working with the student, they're performing at maybe a 1st grade, 2nd month, 1.2. And as you're going along, you see some progress. So by mid-year, they're at 1.4. Part of that conversation is how do we share that data and that progress, and how do we show that the students making gains, and that we talk about moving up to that next reading level or those next increment.
Well, that goes right along with the goal. It'll tell you if they have to score 75%, 80%, 2 out of 3 time trials or something of that nature. You have to look at that, and they have to do that. Once they do that, then you'll move up to the next grade level, and you'll just continue that. Now, sometimes what we find is that they're making progress, but not at a rate that we would like them to. And in that case, we may want to try a different type of intervention to try to see if that will help them to move that a little bit quicker than what they're doing.
Okay, that was good. Thank you. Because we were just talking about that. At what point, if they're making progress, is that at a rate that you had hoped that they make, and then when would you shift that intervention? So we were having those conversations about that. So thank you for clarifying that, Brenda. If anybody has any more, and feel free, anybody that wants to jump in as we're talking about this, we just kind of want to give you the information. And then if you've got something that would better clarify it for everybody, or that you think would benefit for the greater good, just feel free to jump right in. All right, we'll move to the next slide. And so why is it that we progress monitor? And I don't know if Brenda wants to talk any more about this one, but it just kind of gives us why is it that we do this work.
Well, these are the 7 that they came up with. And of course, there's probably a whole lot more, but these probably are the main ones. We measure because we want to report the progress that the kids are making on their goals. Not only are we we're talking to the parents as well. They are part of the ARC, and we have to talk about the progress in our ARC meetings when we do our annual meetings, so we can determine what kind of goals we're going to make for their next IEP. But then we look at it and we think, well, what type of instructional decisions that we have to make? We look to see, if you find that they're dropping 3 data points, and in some instances, to me, I wouldn't weight those 3 data points, but you didn't hear that from me, because we know the child, and we know that there are probably some type of other interventions or strategies that we need to add or take away and redo. So it's going to guide what our instruction is going to be, so we can make adjustments for that child. And then we also need to make sure that the student understands that data as well. They need to be involved. So we need to make sure that the child is on board, no matter what grade. We've been in kindergarten classrooms, and those kids understood their grades, their data points, and those types of things. So was very impressed in like 3 different kindergarten classrooms, and Wayne, one of those was yours. This has determined the effectiveness of the instructional services. So, that data does do more than just show us where that student is at. It's telling us about our instruction and the things that we need to do to make sure that that child is effective. Determine current level of learning, behavior, performance. When we write our goal, our present levels, we try to put in there we need to put in there what grade levels the child is on in reading. What can the child do? The strengths, the concerns. We put those types of things in there. And we get that from the progress monitoring. It tells us everything that we need to know. Then if we want to reevaluate, we can always look at those types of things in the reevaluation process to see, what data do we have here to show what the child is struggling with, what does the child do well with, and that helps with that process. To determine if the student continues to meet eligibility for special education and need specially designed instruction. So we're looking at that just to make sure that the child continues to make that progress, and to see if they are still eligible for services. Now, when we look at that, we have to remember, we have to start taking away accommodations, taking away strategies, those types of things toward the end, once we see the child is mastering that goal. And most of the time you'll find that their data points will start dropping. And when they start dropping, it's because we have taken away, and we don't need to take away all the strategies at one time. We need to do it one thing at a time. We can't just jerk it all away from them. But you're going to see that happen. And sometimes we may even have to go back and add that intervention, those strategies back into that for that child, because the child's not yet ready. So those are the things that we have to use to determine, what type of instruction strategies. It's all about the child. It's all individualized.
So now we want to talk about establishing the baseline data. And I see that we have
several things there. The main thing here is when we're looking at that RTI data is very important because it actually goes with the student records as evidence of what we use. Like sometimes the RTI, if the district decides they want to use RTI to determine SLD, they can do that. So that's what they're talking about with the RTI. And with baseline data too, when you're starting with the initial evaluation, all that data is going to be incorporated in that integrated report, or it should be into that integrated report. If it's a student that's already had an IEP, then you're going to have progress monitoring data to show where that student is at. It will tell us what the baseline data is for that. We have to make sure that they are in measurable terms. It's something that we have to measure. If it's not measurable, we can't do it. We can't keep data on that. We can't write that. We also have to make sure that all that conversation is in that present levels. So, you know, you start with those present levels, and that's what you're looking at first with a student that has already got an IEP. And you go from there and you make sure that your goals are based on what your data says in your present levels.
Brenda, if I could add to that, sometimes we get confused as to whether or not screening information is baseline. And so we have to be careful about using universal screener data to call that baseline. That kind of gets us in a ballpark for a skill deficit. And then once we determine what the skill deficits are, let's say if we're talking about reading comprehension, then we would look at those five areas of reading and see really what's impacting that the most. And that would be a good starting point. And so we would have to get a baseline measure on, let's say, reading comprehension. We would look at how well the student does reading on grade level or not on their grade level, and to see where exactly they are functioning right now, and that kind of formulates your baseline. So you may have to do some of that testing on your own and use those probes. You know, do 4 or 5 of those probes and get your own average for that particular skill level. Because sometimes that screening information, that RTI data, and all that stuff that comes to them by way of a psychological does not really speak to what the baseline is on the skill itself. So you have to funnel that process down and really think about where is this child functioning in regards to his similar age peers. If he's in the 4th grade, does he look like a 4th grader with reading comprehension, or does he look more like a 2nd grader with reading comprehension? And there's that gap, and that's where that adverse effect statement comes from. And so then you go right on with that, and you would develop a percentage around those skills, and you would work to increase that percentage to get them more closer to grade level and close that gap.
So I have a question. So we can use the RTI data. I mean, at the school I'm in, we have it set up to where it's, you know, goes by the standard, and I mean, and everything. So can we use that as the baseline data?
Pretty useful for me. It's about progress monitoring.
Yeah. So, what time is basketball?
5. Why?
Brenda, you want to answer that question?
Are you going to cover the campaign?
Sorry.
Well, the RTI, that's a district decision. Whatever they have in their policies and procedures, that's the way that works. If some doesn't use doesn't want to use the RTI, that's just the way it goes. And some policies will have RTI as well in there.
Should be spelled out in their local policies and procedures. Is that not right, Brenda, as to whether or not they're allowed to use RTI? If we're talking about RTI for baseline or RTI for eligibility, it's 2 different things.
Two different things.
Well, I'm talking about once I've written the IEP, it's a new eligibility. They placed everything, you know, they've tested, everything goes through. They place MMD, suppose, or, you know, just say. Okay. And then can I use the RTI data as a baseline, or do I need to make my own baselines? Do my own and get my own?
I think you have to be really, really intentional about what the baseline is and what on that particular skill. Sometimes those achievement tests will give you a score, but that's not necessarily the baseline. So the thing about it is you're going to have to, you know, you're going to have to embed a measurement tool in your goal.
Okay, so, see, when our district, when we have RTI, you know, they're specific, and it will say that the student will say 8 out of 10 words, you know, CVC words correctly, you know, 80%. I mean, it's just like an IEP goal that that is what our RTI is based on. And that's why I was asking, because I mean, if that's the case, it would make so much easier with using that baseline data, because we know that's the reason they got in.
Well, you also have to go back and look at, the state requires us to have all 6 components for a measurable annual goal, and you have to embed a method of measurement tool. and you have to choose that tool. And most of the time around reading or reading comprehension, it's going to be probes. And so when you put those probes in there, where do the probes come from, and what are you probing, and who's done the probing? So if you're using baseline data, or if you're using RTI data, it might be okay if you're using the same measurement tool and you're continuing that work on. You understand what I'm saying? Like you can't change the tool in the middle of the string, because then you're comparing apples to oranges.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I was asking.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
All righty. Uh-huh.
Let's take a look. So the next slide talks about how we calculate those baseline measures. So either one of you all want it, Brenda or Dan, Paul, Wayne, any of y'all want to talk about how you calculate the baseline?
Well, the median is the preferred measure, you know, because the means are susceptible to outliers when dealing with small sets of numbers. So, you know, that's the more preferred method. However, sometimes we have a transfer student that is in the process of being evaluated, and we have to have a time limit that we try to get under. So what we're trying to do is we're end up doing a mean, which means we'll do several tests at one time. And then all we do is just add those up and divide by the number, you know, the number of scores that we have. So that's the difference between the mean and the median. Of course, there it gives you all other types, you know, how we do that, those kinds of things. But that's the main difference, is that if you have a transfer student or a student that you have to hurry up and get some baseline data for, these are the two measures that we use. But the median, you know, is one that is the most preferred. And then the mean is if we just have to have a child, the data quickly.
And Brenda, you mentioned outlier. And so if you're for example, if you're given a test and you give it 5 straight days and the child gets, let's say 6 out of 10 4 times, but on the 5th time he gets 10 out of 10, that's what you're talking about with an outlier. So that would skew that data, and you would want to throw that score out, or you would want to use the middle score there. So you would go back and calculate the average of the 2 middle scores if you had an uneven, or if you had an even number of scores. Is that correct? Is that the way you see that?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
And so the whole idea, I think the reason this was included in the IEP guidance document was so that teachers had a way of understanding how to calculate the baseline if they did not have baseline. If they could not formulate the baseline, then they had to formulate it themselves. And a situation would be when you had a transfer student, and the student shows up on your front door without ever knowing that they're coming, and then all of a sudden you've got to get some information in there so that you can formulate measurable goals. And if you don't have the baseline correct, and you don't have a consistent method of measurement that you're using, then you're going to have data that's not adequate, it's not valid, and so it's not going to be effective for your instructional change. It's going to help you to determine whether or not the child is in fact making progress within that IEP cycle.
Okay, so next I pulled up on the screen, then we were going to talk about, once we talk about establishing that baseline, and we were just talking about that method of measurement. You have to figure out how you're going to measure that progress, and you want that measurement to be aligned and appropriate for what you're trying to, with that goal. So I'll let if either Brenda or Dan Paul again want to talk about you know, this slide. It's just talking about how we select that method of measurement, and then we'll talk about what those are. So if one of you all want to talk about those 4 types of measurement, if everybody can see that.
Go ahead, Brenda.
Okay, well, the first one there is your curriculum-based measurement. And what we're looking at there is we're looking at probes. Like if we're doing oral reading fluency, what are we doing? We're giving a child a minute to read a passage, and we, you know, mark the errors and determine what their reading rate is. The same thing with math computation probes. We're giving them those probes, let them work the probes, and we have to remember the what we say, if it's a 2-digit plus 2-digit carrying or whatever in the goal, that's what we are monitoring. We're not monitoring 3 digits minus 2 digits and those types of things. Whatever the goal says, this is what we're going to be assessing on. Math concepts and applications. So you have those things there as your curriculum-based measures. Those are for academics only. You won't see that in behavior or any of those types of things. It's academic only. When you're looking at the direct measures, you are looking directly at the student. You see the student do it. So, you know, there's different types of measures there that are listed. And in the IEP guidance document, it goes through those and gives you a definition of those so you'll understand them, because if you don't use them, you forget what they mean. But a lot of these are, if you're looking at that, a lot of them show behavior issues. If you've got some type of behavior in a classroom and you're trying to do frequency count to see how many times that behavior occurred, those types of things. Scatter plot is one that I really like. I don't see much with that, but scatter plot is a real good measure. Then you're looking at your ABC recordings. Those are, as you know, are all behavior related. Anecdotal records. There is one thing to caution you about, because whatever you write in there on a child, it can be sent with the records to another school, or if the parents request a copy of the records, they have to copy that as well. So you have to write down, make sure you're not writing something you don't want nobody else to see. Now, a checklist is, it can be either direct or indirect. Of course, direct, you're looking right at the student doing whatever task that they're performing, you're checking off the checklist. And then, of course, you've got that running record when you're doing the reading. When you're looking over at indirect, you don't see the child. And sometimes we have goals that we write and the child's in another classroom, and the teacher is the co-teacher in the classroom is actually over this, and it's not you. So, you know, a rubric, you know, that's the main thing we look at in writing. We use rubrics for that. What are we going to get to make a 4 or a 3 or 2 or 1? Those types of things. So it gives you a list of those things there. And again, these are all defined in your IEP guidance document. Now, the last one is authentic assessment. And what we must remember with authentic assessment is that it cannot stand alone. You're going to have a direct or an indirect measure to go along with that. So it cannot stand alone. And of course, it's got a list there of things that you see. And if you'll notice, in authentic assessment, it's got work samples. And when we go out and we do record review for different districts, we sometimes find that they have work samples written as the measure and the goal. Well, they're authentic assessment, but when you go down and look at what they've checked in the drop-down box, it'll have curriculum-based measurement. Well, those are two different types of things. So that's what we're trying to preach on, is to make sure that whatever you say the measure is, that is what it is. So make sure that you look in your IEP guidance document and you're certain of what measure you're using for that goal.
There is a tremendous website that gives some background reading on each one of these particular tools. And to really understand progress monitoring and to be able to do progress monitoring on an IEP goal correctly, you really have to get your head wrapped around making a connection between what each one of these things are and what they will measure, because they won't always measure everything. Okay, so you got to match up the behavior that's to be measured with the correct method of measurement, if that makes sense. And the website I was referring to is a website that I've used for transition, but I've also used it for this too. It's the South Bend Community School Corporation, and it's in Indiana. So if you'll Google the South Bend Community School Corporation, and you will look there for methods of measurement with your Google search, it will bring this website up that gives you a tremendous amount of information around each one of these particular steps or tools that are listed here. And so when when you're thinking about authentic assessment, the one thing that jumps off the page to me is that if you do authentic assessment, you're going to have something else that's going to generate data that you can progress monitor. Okay, so a lot of that stuff is anecdotal information. It's oral interview, it's portfolio, it's work samples. You're going to have something that's going to generate some data. So you're going to have to do a second one, either a direct or an indirect or a curriculum-based probe along with that authentic assessment in order to meet the requirements of the state. With an indirect one, I think about that as being teacher takes the papers home and grades them and doesn't see the student actually doing the work. Kind of thing. And then the direct one is really, really applicable to behavior measurement. And then, of course, the curriculum-based measures are, like Brenda said, just for the academic pursuits, reading, math, written expression, that type of thing.
Anybody have any questions they would like to ask right now to any of the folks that are here? Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide then. And then this one's just one talking about, it goes back and refers down at the bottom of the page, right back to the IEP guidance document. And it is talking about collecting, graphing, and interpreting progress data to make instructional decisions.
Denny Paul, that's yours. You're the diagnostician.
The diagnostician. Okay. Let me get my head wrapped into this here for just a second. So these are the things that are required by the state when you're graphing your information, when you're like actually giving a visual representation to your parents when you're doing progress reports. You're required to have a graph to go along with each goal. And the one thing I can point out that we had a really, really rough time of a couple of years ago was making sure that we matched the frequency in which we take data to what we're putting on the graph. So if we, for example, if that F part of our measurable annual goal, frequency of data collection, says that we're going to take data once a week, we have to have a graph that captures that. So we would have dates along the bottom of that graph, and it would be on an X and Y axis, but it would be down on the bottom, going across the bottom, and you would have 1 week apart, and then you would have a data point for each week if you were doing weekly measurements. So that's one thing to keep in mind. You got to title your graph, tell what you're looking at, if it's reading comprehension or whatever it might be. And then you have to also have those measurements that have been taken in a short period of time to establish the baseline. And then you would draw a vertical line to indicate that that's where the baseline, that's where you begin. So if the child's getting 6 out of 10 correct consistently, and that's the baseline, then you would indicate that with a vertical line. And then you would draw, of course, the aim line, the trend line. The aim line is a desired rate of progress, and it looks somewhat like that. That graphic is a little tough sometimes to see exactly what we're doing, but the aim line would be from the baseline to the expected rate of progress. Okay, so you would go from one end where they're at 42, and the goal is to get to, I'm having a hard time seeing this because you guys know I lose my glasses all the time. And,
it's 110.
Like 112 or 110.
Yeah,
somewhere
yeah,
in that
110.
So that would be your aim line, and then you would look at your trend line. It would actually be a line that you did that drew the dots, and then you would draw a line through those dots on a plane that was going to reach up to 110, and you would see how many dots you would hit, and that would be able to indicate to you how on track you are and whether or not you've got performance that's well below the aim line or well above the aim line, and what kind of instructional decisions you make around that. So there are rules that you apply in progress monitoring. If you have so many data points that are well below the aim line, then you're going to increase support. If you're trying to get a measure up, like on reading fluency, if you're trying to get the child to read more words per minute, then you would increase support around that. And then if you had one where he was just knocking the top out of it and his rate was way up there around the 90s for 4 or 5 consecutive times, your rules will dictate when you make that change and you reduce support and you try to get that movement along that aim line to be a little more level. And so that you can say, yeah, we're going to keep on trucking right here because we're doing a good job. What we're doing with our teaching, what we're doing with our strategies, what we're doing with our progress monitoring is all kind of matching up, and we're real sure by the end of this cycle, this year cycle, that the child is in fact going to meet the goal. So you want to look around that time, and that's the kind of information that you would also include in your review analysis. Each time you do a report card, you should be doing an analysis and determining the effectiveness of your specially designed instruction in order to say, yes, the kid's making progress, what we're doing, we're going to keep on doing, or we're going to adjust those supports, we're going to adjust those strategies, and we're going to get to see what's going on with this student, why they're not making progress like we thought they were going to when we set this goal.
Also, on that graph, that really wasn't a very good graph, but that's what was placed in that document.
Yeah.
If you'll notice on the bottom, it's got the arrows. So you're really collecting 2 different types of data, which we don't recommend. We would rather have one thing at a time. It's hard to do 2 things on a graph. So if you look at that bottom where it's got those green dots, those are the arrows. So they're actually looking at 2 separate items in this one goal, which is complicated.
Yes, this needs to be corrected too, because it's talking about dibbles, and that's really a program around response to intervention that a lot of districts used at one time to capture the RTI data. So that's kind of a picture, I guess, they've taken of that dibbles work. And so we want to think more about, in my opinion, and Brenda, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Dion, please step in anytime I'm saying something that's not correct. But to me, it's more about the teacher kind of digging in, seeing where the kid is on these skills, and really prioritizing what skills that are going to get them closer to grade level, similar grade performance, and really digging in and kind of doing your own work around those goals, finding out what method of measurement you need to use, and making sure you stick with that and continue to test that child after you've applied those strategies, and take data frequently. And you can take data and not record it. You can take data every day on engagement and your good teaching. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to inform your progress monitoring with that data. You can take data once a week, but you should be taking data on student response very frequently in order to ensure that the student is making progress and that they're understanding the concepts that you're teaching. Students with disabilities really, really, really benefit from explicit instruction and from many, many response opportunities. So when you're thinking about your teaching, you can capture data once a week and that's fine on your goals, but you should be capturing data all the time, constantly, in your small group work, in your co-teaching situations, in your resource rooms. Very, very important to understand that, it should be grassroots efforts to try to increase skills around those deficits. And we should be looking at the standards and seeing what those standards are and what those students should be looking like as they move closer to similar age performance.
And it really guides, if we've selected or we're looking at specially designed instruction, that gives us an opportunity. It's really an opportunity that if we're not seeing students make adequate progress, then we can change that, because that's not the most appropriate specially designed instruction to meet that student's need. So it really gives us a clue of, some midpoint checks and some progress all along the way to see, are we really getting to what that kid needs in order to help them to advance. And like Dean Paul was saying, we really have to prioritize what those skills are in those standards, and what those skills that students need, and then are we using the right strategies for that individual student.
Yes, because special design instruction, it's what is what strategies or interventions or instruction the teacher is going to use to get the material across. And this plays a vital role in connecting the content to the student's prior knowledge.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's just important. I mean, just like kids need feedback, we need that feedback on the effectiveness of our instruction. So we don't want to keep doing the same things over and over and not having an impact on student learning.
Right. And we need to take measures, frequently, and we need to provide them ample opportunity to respond, and a lot of practice. Yep. They need a lot of practice. They need a lot of retrieval practice, because they have cognitive deficits. A lot, if you're talking about a child that has an intellectual disability, you're talking about a child that needs lots of support in lots of ways. And so we have to kind of cut through and find out what are the most crucial and critical skills that they're going to need to get to that next level.
Right.
And that has to really inform our work.
Yep. And I think the second bullet point on this slide that we're looking at right now is talking about reporting progress to parents. This really is, and it really is a tool for us that we can show what that looks like. If we're trying to talk to parents and talk about, some of the things that we've tried, and then whether or not that student was successful with that, it really gives them a visual support. So if they maybe don't understand all of the context of, SDI or all of the instructional strategies, or what we use a lot of technical terms, but this gives them a visual support to say, okay, yeah, is my child making progress? And if not, then what can we do? Because, they can be involved in that process. There may be some opportunities for some practice and some, like Dean Paul was just talking about, they need additional opportunities for practice. Well, if our parents know and we can communicate that to parents, then we can get them on board with that learning process and get kids more opportunity for practice. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead to the next slide, and this one's just talking about how do we look at that annual review analysis based on that data collection that we've done. So,
Brenda.
Okay, so when and we've got a little activity that we normally do with Ann and Mark, I believe it is, but that shows you the pieces that we need to have in there. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to look from the beginning of the school year, or whenever the IEP started, to the end of that IEP. We're looking at how well the student did with data. We have to talk about the data. So, if Mark was answering inferential questions in the second grade level, and it maybe at 40% at the beginning, and then we turn around and we talk about the segments. It may be each report card that you all want to talk about, and to look at the progress. And if the child, if Mark is not making any progress, then we're going to write in there, what did we change? What strategies? What interventions? What did we change to try to get Mark back on track? And that's what we're writing in this analysis for that. The reason for the analysis is for determining if your student needs ESY, Extended School Year Services. So that's the big part of that, is the reason why they wanted the analysis placed in there. But when we're talking about the analysis, we need to make sure that we're listing the SDI in the report. It's not a report, it's maybe just a little old short paragraph is what it is. And it could be talking about the changes, this scaffolding or modeling or whatever you're doing for your SDI. And if the child, and at the end, you're going to talk about did he make progress? Was progress at the rate that you wanted him to have or her to have? So that's the piece that they're wanting you to put in there to show that the child either needs ESY or does not need ESY.
And so this next slide is an example of that. So this would be that narrative piece that you're talking about, Brenda.
Yes.
So do you need the narrative piece and the graph?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Just to clarify.
This kind of information should be included with the progress report that's sent, because there should be a report on progress on the goal based on the regulation. As often as we send report cards home for kids that are not disabled. Mm-hmm. So this is I think an excerpt from the guidance document itself. There's 2 or 3 different ones. There are ones that are making progress, ones that are not making progress, that type of thing. There's 2 or 3 different ones that you can access easily there on in the IEP guidance document. And I apologize because I don't know the page number. They seem to change from time to time, and I have a hard time keeping my head wrapped into that. But it says page 77 on this slide, so it would be close to that, I would think.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Good.
This is a newer one that we created in our last task group.
Yes.
This one here on Brandon.
So it's a good example then about that comprehensive. It talks about, he was answering questions at the 2nd grade level at 40%. So anyway, you feel like this is a good example because it includes, instructional strategies. It tells you about kind of time frames and strategies.
And it actually talks about, when the assistance was faded, what happened.
Okay. Right. Because right here it talks about, as teacher assistance was faded. And so
if you go back to your graph there, Dion, when you see those breaks, like you would have a vertical line going from top to bottom. Mm-hmm. So you would indicate those instructional changes with a vertical line. You would say, here we've tried something, we've changed something.
Right.
So you would draw that vertical line in with a different color pen. Yeah, you'd go up to
here
from top to bottom, bottom to top.
Right. So you'd put that in there. Yeah. So that was a good representation of how. So you just show, okay, so you were looking here and you saw a decline here. Well, you may change instructional strategy. So right here, you're going to put a line and then you change the new instructional strategy. And then you see that data point bouncing back up. Yeah.
Into your analysis. Yeah. And kind of try to explain it. A lot of things happen in kids' lives. They get sick. They have social issues. Depending on how old they are or whatever. They have grandparents that pass away. They have, there's lots of things that go on with kids. So we have to be cognizant of all that and include that in our analysis each time. And then sometimes it's just they're not responding to our strategies and we need to switch our strategies. Absolutely. And that's kind of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we have different types of learners. Absolutely. We're all different.
Right.
Absolutely. So the next slide is a resource. And so one of you all want to talk about that, but this is an excellent resource to have for tracking the data and entering that data. So
yeah, this resource was created by a gentleman down in Morgan County, and we had him. This is a free Google kind of classroom document where you can enter your data and it kind of graphs it for you, and then you have a place for your analysis. It kind of hits all the check boxes. If you're looking at a folder and you're saying, is progress monitoring in fact in place here? And we can see it's being done with fidelity because there's analysis, there's change, there's documentation, there's data points, there's dates, it's named. We know what they're trying to measure here, and so everything there is in place. And this is one that you can access. I think through Teacher Pay Teacher. I think also, and I'm having a hard time remembering the guy's name. Do you guys remember?
Is it Mark?
Dion, I swear, I'm telling. I apologize, but I have a hard time remembering his name. He really did a good job with this, but this is available, and I think like some of our districts are using it exclusively.
Yes, they are. Many districts are using that.
Yeah, and so It's really a good tool because it
Chris?
does the percentages for you. It will do the math for you. It's almost like an Excel type of document that he's kind of crafted to meet the regulation. It started out as an RTI form, and now it's become one that we can use for progress monitoring for goals in the IEP.
Okay.
And
Thank you. This was just, I just used the slide to remind everyone that they can access this document. We pulled this information straight from the IEP guidance document. For anybody that wants to go back and have access to this information. So if you have questions or something comes up, it's a great, go back to this resource and keep it handy so that you have it just to support your own work when you're writing goals. Well, in the whole process.